Welcome back to the California Coastal Commission. Turning it back over to staff for the next agenda item.
Thank you. And the next item is the item that we trailed earlier, item 15C. If we could bring up the PowerPoint for that, please. Now, item 15C is for the appeal of a coastal development permit approved by the City of Los Angeles for construction of a 64,646 square foot, 45-foot high, 4-story Eldercare assisted living facility. It would have 82 rooms for Eldercare residents, 23 of which would be specifically dedicated for memory care and dementia patients, and 66 on-site parking spaces. That would be located on a vacant lot with 19,300 plus cubic yards of exported material resulting from the excavation. Now, the applicant is Palisades Drive LP, and there are 4 separate appeals that have been submitted on this. And altogether, there's approximately 125 individual appellants. 3 of those appeals are by individuals, and then there was a substantially larger group of homeowners that have joined on one appeal. And those names are listed on the front page of your staff reports. Now, as shown on this slide, the site is located approximately 2.5 miles from Topanga Beach and Pacific Coast Highway, and it's located within a densely developed 740-unit residential subdivision known as the Headlands that was originally approved by the Commission in the 1970s within the Pacific Palisades area within the city of LA. This slide shows the extent of the Headlands subdivision shown in yellow, and that allowed grading for the roads, the utilities, and the building pads themselves. And as part of its approval of the underlying subdivision, the Commission established an urban limit line for the subdivision that limited development to certain clusters in order to protect public views, natural landforms, maintain public recreational opportunities, and habitat that would be located outside of that urban limit line. As can be seen in this aerial photograph of the project site, and it shows the surrounding area, the neighborhood is characterized by large 2- and primarily 3-story residential condominium units that are part of those large clusters of structures. Now, the subject site itself has been previously developed with a large flat pad area, which was graded pursuant to the Commission's coastal permit for that underlying subdivision. The site is one of 4 lots that were created by that subdivision that were specifically designated for commercial uses. So they are unique from the other lots in the subdivision in that the other lots were designated for residential use. These 4 lots were designated for commercial uses. And eldercare facilities such as the approved project are an allowed use within commercially zoned areas pursuant to the city's zoning code. Now, the primary assertion by the appellants is that the large 4-story eldercare facility would not be compatible with the character of the surrounding community in regard to the project's height, mass, and design, and that it would block both public and private scenic views to the mountains. The appellants raised several other issues as well and contend that the 200 feet of required fuel modification would impact environmentally sensitive habitat area, that the project will increase geologic instability in the area, would not minimize energy consumption and vehicle miles traveled, would result in adverse impacts to hiking trails in the area due to increased traffic and lack of adequate parking, and that the project is not consistent with the development provisions of the Commission's Regional Interpretive Guidelines and the city's Brentwood Palisades Community Plan. Also, that the city erred in their CEQA determination, and that the city approval of the project would prejudice the ability for the city to prepare an LCP in the future that would be consistent with the Coastal Act. Now, in regard to the appellant's primary issue regarding community character, I would note that the 64,646 square foot, 45-foot high, 4-story eldercare assisted living facility, a rendering of which is shown on this slide, and that's the large structure with this yellow lower component here, that it would be slightly higher than the nearby residential and commercial structures. It would be 1 story higher than many of those 3-story buildings. Now, the existing restaurant on the adjacent commercial parcel immediately south is a large 27,590 square foot, 23-foot tall commercial building with a restaurant, and the nearby residential condo complexes to the north and east do have far larger footprints when you look at those clusters of the buildings in terms of square footage, but they are lower and they range from 2 to 3 stories and 20 to 36 feet in height. Regardless, although the approved structure would be 1 story taller than those nearby residences, it should be noted that the subject site was specifically approved by the Commission in its underlying approval of the subdivision for commercial development. And that's what makes this site different and unique from those residential parcels. And it was with the understanding that this site would be developed in a different manner than the surrounding residential areas. Now, specifically, the city zoning code limits the heights of residential parcels, but it does not include a height limit for new structures on the commercially designated lots within the Headlands subdivision. Moreover, the approved structure is consistent with the Commission's previous approval of a CDP for other institutional-like uses on the 3 other commercially designated lots within the subdivision. And that includes one of those sites, the Calvary Christian School facility, that's located on the same street, further from the site, but still within the Headlands subdivision. And that's shown here on this slide in that yellow circle. Now, as can be seen on this aerial photograph of the Calvary Christian School facility, it's approximately more than 60,000 square feet in size, and it's similar in that it is an institutional use. And the maximum height for structures on that lot was 50 feet. So we do think that there's some comparison that could be made to how these other sorts of commercial lots have been developed. Now, the other 2 commercial lots were lower. They had the 20 to 30 foot height limits, and they were also large, about 25,000 square feet in size. But taken as a whole, we think that there was flexibility intended for how you develop the commercial designated parcels. Now, in regard to the assertion by some of the appellants that the approved development would impact environmentally sensitive habitat area in conflict with the resource protection provisions of the Coastal Act, I would note that although the subdivision itself is surrounded by large expansive areas of environmentally sensitive habitat areas, characterized primarily by chaparral and coastal sage scrub and riparian habitat areas, the subject site itself is entirely on an existing graded pad. There is no native vegetation or sensitive habitat that would be affected by the structure itself. Now, the appellants are asserting, though, that it's the 200 feet of required fuel modification necessary to comply with LA County Fire Department requirements that would impact this sensitive habitat, and that's located to the west of the site. So if you look on this slide, you can see there's a descending slope that descends down. Now, if you go far enough to the bottom of that canyon, there is a stream. But the area of the slope that we're talking about where this 200 feet of fuel modification, where that would be located, that is previously graded and disturbed slope areas that were graded to create the pad. There's a series of concrete V-ditches within that area that would be subject to fuel mod. And it appears to have been landscaped or revegetated, probably with a mix of native and landscape species, presumably as part of the original mitigation for the grading of those slopes. But regardless, I think it's more relevant to note that due to the proximity of that commercial structure immediately to the south, shown here, and the condos just to the north, those existing structures already create zones of overlapping fuel modification zones, such that this project would have none or very little new fuel modification, and that would occur within these existing disturbed areas. It does not extend all the way down to the bottom of that canyon where the creek is located, and it would not affect sensitive habitat in staff's opinion. So we do not believe that there is any potential impact to any sensitive coastal resources as a result of that vegetation clearance related to fuel mod. In regard to the appellant's assertions that the project would increase geologic instability, staff would note that the new development, again, is located on that existing graded pad that has been engineered and found to be stable. And the city found that that pad was stable as well. And that the applicant submitted all the necessary geologic and geotechnical reports and foundation plans, which the city appropriately used in their determination that the project was adequately designed to ensure geologic and engineering stability. And they found that development would not result in adverse effects to the stability of off-site areas as well, and that would be consistent with the the Section 30253 of the Coastal Act. There's also, the appeal also includes the assertion that the project would increase traffic in the area and that the 66 parking spaces provided on site would not be adequate to ensure the public's ability to access nearby public hiking trails, and that public access would then be adversely affected. I would note that the city did a parking analysis for this development and found that the 66 spaces that is provided here is adequate for this sort of facility, and it's consistent with the city's zoning code. Now, the city has a specific parking requirement for these sorts of elder care facilities. It's one parking space per the regular elder care units, and it's a fraction. It's 0.2 parking spaces for the memory care and dementia patient units. And that comes out to 66 parking spaces, and that number includes the amount of parking that would be necessary to support the staff and the visitor parking for this sort of facility as well. Now, that lower parking ratio is different than other sorts of commercial development. And that reflects the city's belief that there is a reduced parking demand for elderly assisted living residents, the majority of which are not expected to own or drive vehicles, particularly in the memory care and dementia unit where they would not have any vehicles at all. Now, the facility, as these facilities typically do, would provide a shuttle and van transportation for its residents on an as-needed basis, and that's expected to further reduce both vehicle trips and parking demand. And thus, staff concurs with the city's findings that the development would provide for adequate parking and that there's no substantial issue raised relative to the public access and recreation provisions of the Coastal Act. Now, one of the additional assertions regarding parking raised by the appellants was that the amount of parking would be inconsistent with the Commission's old regional interpretive guidelines from the 1980s in regard to parking requirements for commercial development. I believe those say typically it's one space per 250 square feet. But again, those are general guidelines intended for general commercial development such as retail. As we know, local governments typically require different ratios for different sorts of commercial uses. A restaurant would have a greater parking demand than, say, a retail shop. And these elder care facilities have this different parking ratio that the city has determined to be adequate for this sort of facility. So we do think that the city's more specific ratio is the correct way to approach the parking analysis for this project. Now, there are also several procedural contentions raised by the appellants, and those are that the project is inconsistent with the Brentwood Pacific Palisades Community Plan. In their findings, the city found that the project would comply with the requirements of this community plan, but regardless, while the city may use that plan as guidance, the plan has not been reviewed or certified by the Commission, and thus the appellant's assertion does not constitute valid grounds for appeal. Now, similar to this, the appellants assert that the project was inconsistent with the Commission's 1980s residential design guidelines and that the city erred in their determination that the project was consistent with CEQA. Neither of these claims, again, are valid grounds for appeal because the standard of review are the Chapter 3 policies of the Coastal Act, and thus they are not relevant in this matter. Now, the standard of review is whether an issue is raised regarding conformity with the Chapter 3 policies of the Coastal Act. And in previous decisions on appeals, the Commission has been guided by the following 5 factors that are listed here on this slide, including the local government's findings to support their decision, scope of development, significance of coastal resources affected, precedential value, and whether statewide issues are raised. And there's a detailed discussion of these factors relevant to the project on pages 15 and 16 of your report. But I would note that in this case, staff concurs with the city that they have provided adequate findings for their decision and that the project will not result in any significant adverse impacts to coastal resources. Thus, we do not believe that this appeal meets any of these 5 criteria. I would note there is an addendum for this item that attaches correspondence received by some of the appellants raising the same issues raised in their appeals and that we believe have been fully addressed in the staff report and in the addendum. Now, the addendum also contains emails from 20 of the appellants who assert that they were not properly noticed of this hearing. Staff would note that an initial error did occur with regard to noticing, but that this initial error was subsequently corrected in a timely manner on the next day. On Monday, June 25th, appropriately addressed envelopes were inadvertently mailed without the actual notice, and those were sent out to the list of known interested parties that was provided by the appellants. The following day, on Tuesday, June 26th, the clerical error by staff was discovered, and the project was properly renoticed to all parties using the exact same list of known interested parties provided by the appellants. Now, the second corrective notices were sent well before the July 2nd deadline for the Commission to provide timely notice at least 10 days before the hearing. However, 20 of the noticed individuals assert that they did not receive that second corrected notice and are requesting postponement of the hearing to next month, which would allow for a local hearing at Redondo Beach. However, the Coastal Act requires that the substantial issue phase of an appeal be heard by the Commission within 49 working days. And that would not allow for this matter to be rescheduled unless the applicant waives the 49-day working time limit for action. And in this case, the applicant has declined to do so. Regardless, these individuals who have raised the noticing issue are listed as appellants, and they were fully aware of the hearing, that it would be scheduled for the Commission's July meeting, and they previously indicated their issues with the project as part of their submitted grounds for this appeal, and those were fully addressed in the staff report. Additionally, staff has met with 2 of the individuals and had telephone conversations with several others since the hearing date was set to ensure that appellants were aware of the proceedings. Now, finally, to date, staff has not received any return mail as undeliverable for any of that second set of corrected notices, and I would note that staff continues to recommend that the city's action on this matter does not raise substantial issue in regard to its consistency with any Chapter 3 policy of the Coastal Act, and that the assertions by some of the appellants that they did not receive that second corrective notice would not change that recommendation. So in closing, staff concurs with the city that the project is consistent with the standard review and would not result in any significant adverse impacts to coastal resources. Thus, we're recommending the Commission find that no substantial exists in this case. The motion to accomplish that can be found on page 4 of your staff reports. That concludes the staff presentation. I am available for any questions.
Thank you. Are there any ex partes? Commissioner Padilla.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. On the 5th of July this year at 2 o'clock, I took a phone call in my office at the city of Chula Vista with Ronnie Schramm, Kevin McDonald, Susan McCabe, Ann Blemker, myself, and from my council staff, Mr. Tony Cruz. I was provided a hard copy of a 19-slide presentation that I know is in the file, as well as an email copy of the correspondence dated the 3rd from Jeffer Mangles. The applicants gave a brief overview of the project and the application history in the Pacific Highlands area. They indicated the project site is surrounded by multifamily residential and commercial development, and emphasized that it's located well within and surrounded by the multifamily residential and commercial development that was established in the 1978 CDP. They reviewed the local approval process, the appeals, contentions, level of public support, and the benefits of the project in general. Indicated that the proposed project is compatible with the size and scale of surrounding development, will not result in impacts to sensitive habitat through construction or fuel modification. Also noted, as a side note, it is consistent with local fire safety regulations and a detailed disaster evacuation plan, which is noted by the local approval. They are in agreement with the staff recommendation. They also noted that the parking demand and vehicle trips generated by the project is permitted is not substantial enough to create an access issue, and so they believe there's no substantial evidence supporting a finding that the appeal raises a substantial issue, and they support the staff recommendation. On the 9th of this month, at about noon, in my office at the same location, I participated in a phone call with Thomas Donovan and Sarah Juan. On that call, in addition to myself, was also Mr. Cruz. They also provided me email communications containing a complete appeal summary and a hard copy of their 16-page slide presentation, which I note are also in the file. They indicated they don't oppose development at the site, but essentially that possible impacts to important natural parks contiguous to the project have been insufficiently analyzed and present the potential to have impacts on views, traffic, and parking, and on that basis alone that the commission should find a substantial issue. They pointed out that it's immediately adjacent to Santa Ynez Canyon Park and Topanga Park, and noted that the park trail distance noted in the staff report referred to a park other than Topanga. They overlooked the fact that Topanga's trailhead is only 150 feet from the project site. They indicated impacts to views and brush clearance needed for the project, and that all coastal resource impacts should be considered. They went over, again, the concerns about the trip generation and the displacing of on-street parking, creating an access issue, indicated that the city was required to make findings based on the LUP, and that this was insufficient. There was insufficient information or analysis in the record, and that substantial issue should be found. Each of these conversations lasted about 15 minutes, and those conclude my ex partes.
Thank you. Commissioner Sundberg.
July 3rd, 2018 at 10 a.m., I took a phone call at my house from Ronnie Schramm, Kevin McDonald, Susan McCabe, and Ann Blemker, and they gave me they emailed me the briefing book that's in the packet. They let me know that this is a 82 guest room, 23 memory care units, and 59 assisted living Eldercare facility on a vacant graded lot in Pacific Highlands area. The project is surrounded by a multifamily residential and other commercial development that is consistent with this project. The representatives discussed the project history, local approval process, appeal contentions, public support, and project benefits. According to the representatives, the proposed Eldercare facility is compatible with the size and scale of surrounding development and will not result in any impacts to sensitive habitat through construction or field modification activities. And it's in accordance with the local fire safety requirements. And the applicant is in full agreement with the staff recommendation of no substantial issue and requests us to concur. And the phone call lasted about 15 minutes as well. Thank you.
Commissioner Luevano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On Monday, this week, July 9th of 2018, at about 2:30 in the afternoon, I received a text message from Councilmember Mike Bonin, who represents this area on the Los Angeles City Council. And he said he just wanted to let me know that he is in favor of the project in Pacific Palisades and that most people in the community favor it, and we need it. He also mentioned that a handful of folks are challenging the CDP and that he had sent a letter which should be in the file. And I reported this as well to staff on Monday.
Any other ex partes? Commissioner Uranga.
Thank you. I had two ex partes. The first one I had on July 2nd at approximately 10:30 in the morning. I made actually a project visit to the site. I met with the applicant representatives to discuss the proposed construction of an Eldercare facility with 82 guest rooms, 23 memory care units, and 59 assisted living. And of course, the discussion was as described by my fellow commissioners Sundberg and Padilla. I also had an ex parte with the appellants, with Sarah Wan, Sarah Connor, and Tom Donovan, and included my chief of staff, Celine Luna, met at my office, and we discussed the negative impacts to recreational coastal zone parkland, trails, public access impacts, brush clearance impacts. They also highlighted the project size as being out of conformance with the surrounding neighborhood and that a comprehensive traffic study had not been completed to adequately address neighborhood and trail access impacts.
And just for point of clarification, your second communication was what date?
Oh, I'm sorry, July 3rd at 2:30 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other commissioners with ex partes on this matter? Seeing none, we will move into the substantial issue hearing. Staff is recommending a finding of no substantial issue. With these matters, when no substantial issue is recommended by staff, there is the ability for the appellant and the applicant to give testimony. We have agreed that the amount of time per side will be 5 minutes in total, and so you may divide that up among the speakers as you so desire. We'll first have the applicant come before us, and, I'm sorry, the appellant come before us, and I have 2 speaker cards for the appellants, Mr. Thomas Donovan, and the remainder time will be given to Miss Jan Rutkin Ostendorf as we discussed during public comment. If you could please state your name for the record.
Thank you. My name is Thomas Donovan. I represent the appellants, Pacific Palisades Residents Association. That's just one set of appellants. There are other appellants. I don't represent them. I'm not speaking for them. Thank you for your time and allowing me to speak today. We do have a PowerPoint, and I'll try to operate it properly. California, as you know, California's coastal zone not only includes the areas right next to the ocean, but it also includes all the areas in the coastal zone, including coastal hills, mountains, and parklands. And the parklands are a critical coastal resource. They need to be preserved and kept available for public access. This project is going to harm these important coastal resources because the city refused to consider and evaluate views from public trails and or traffic and parking impacts to public access solely because the site is 2.5 miles from the ocean. They are applying the exact wrong standard. The second thing I want to say to you is that my clients, the appellants, we are not opposed to developing the site, but the only way the commission can review or mitigate any impacts is by finding substantial issue. We're looking at slide number 2. That shows Santa Ynez City Park, which is right on the project's property line. If you look to the right corner there, you'll see a joint trail entrance for this park, and that's to Topanga State Park at the end of Vereda de la Montura. That's only 150 feet from the project. There's no parking for this, and the parking has to be on the street. And for some reason, staff refuses to acknowledge that this exists, and it's there. And I'll show you another slide later on, which will show you the sign and the gate for it. Next slide, number 3 there, you note the trails that are in green. And you note the trailhead to Topanga State Park is on there as well. In Topanga State Park, there's a 17.2 square miles of wilderness. And again, this trailhead is only 150 feet away. We'll go to slide number 5. Again, you can see the trailhead in green, the trail in green right below the site there, and you see in the upper right corner the trailhead entrance. That's the trailhead that staff refers to as being 600 feet away. That's not the one we're talking about, which is on Vereda de la Montoya and Montura, and that's on the other end, and it's only 150 feet away. The next slides, and you've got them in front of you as well. 6 will show you the Santa Ynez Park, which is right below the site. It's a very high fire hazard severity zone, requires 200 feet of clearance, and that's going to destroy the natural habitat around that and expose the project structure from the trails. This affects the views. You can see the trailhead on slide number 7, looking up at the project area, and you can see what it's going to look like if it's all cleared. Now here's the thing, no story poles were ever erected, and no view analysis was done by the city because the city doesn't care unless you can see the ocean, and the staff didn't even do them either. So when you clear the brush from there, you're going to be able to see the structure, and there's no basis for a finding that views to the adjacent trails will not be affected. Go to slide number 9. This looks east toward the west, and you can see the 45-foot structure. Now, we recognize that's not the exact structure. We're not trying to pretend that it is, but we wanted to give you a silhouette height, at least, so you can see how high it is from there. And the office structure buildings right below that site, they're only 23 feet high, and no view analysis has been done from any point on the trails again. Now we'll go to slide 10. That's the trailhead on Vereda del Montura. It's a real trailhead. It goes to Topanga State Park. That's 150 feet down there. Nobody from the city or staff will acknowledge its existence. And 11 shows looking down the street toward there where you can see it again. That's where everybody parks when they want to go on that trail. There's no other parking for there. Slide number 12 shows the, again, Vereda de la Montura is the only street other than Palisades Drive available for that trailhead parking. Now, slide 13 shows Palisades Drive, and that has a lot of parking, cars parked on it also for the other commercial property and for the other trailhead that's further away. Again, there was no traffic analysis. There's never been a full parking analysis on this project. The city relied on 166 trips, but there's no factual support. So the visitors and staff are going to be parking on this street and interfering. Let me just conclude.
We actually have extended the time out. Typically, we allow 3 minutes, and so we've extended the time out already to the 5-minute piece. So I'm going to have you sum up in the next 10 seconds.
Okay. There's no evidence that the parking is going to be sufficient. You've got no evidence, and none has ever been advanced by the applicant as how many people are going to work there, going to go there to this place.
Thank you. Thank you. And so I believe that you've used the full 5 minutes, so hopefully that's sufficient. I think the issues with respect to the notice have been covered. The next speakers will be the applicants, and I have 2 speaker cards. One is for Kevin McDonald, and the other for, it looks like I can't read the first name, but last name Oakes. And I'll leave it to you as to how you would like to divide it, just for clarification, making sure that those 2 speaker cards represent the applicant. Is that correct?
That's correct. We represent the applicant. My name is Kevin McDonald. I'll take the majority of the time. We reserve some time for possible questions for Mr. Oates. He's an accomplished fire expert who could answer some specific questions about the fire safety issues if you have them. Otherwise, I wanted to go to this PowerPoint presentation here and talk about the merits of the case. But before I do that, the notice issue very briefly, I think is really not an issue. Staff, I think, adequately explained the situation as I understand it. Mailings went out timely. There were some complaints that some of the envelopes were empty. That was corrected the very next day. And some of the same people who said they received empty envelopes later said they received nothing on the second mailing. But staff assures me that they use the same mailing list both times, and there have been no return mailings. So the conclusion that I think is reasonable is that proper notice was done. Going back to 1978, these particular properties, the commercial properties, were designated commercial from the beginning. As staff has said, is about 2.5 miles from the coast, always designated for commercial development. There was an established urban limit line within which this project is located. Since then, the development has gone up to over 1,700 homes, roughly split 850 between single family and multifamily. The applicant has done extensive outreach in the area. They've owned the property since 2013. They've been to countless homeowners association meetings. They've worked with staff since June of last year to assure compliance with the coastal regulations. The local land use committee of the Palisades Community Council supports the project. The Pacific Palisades Chamber of Commerce supports the project. West LA Area Planning Commission joined in a unanimous decision to overturn an appeal of the original zoning administrator's approval by these same appellants. And as you heard, LA City Councilman Mike Bonin has submitted a letter of support to the record. There's a demonstrated need for this project. The Pacific Palisades area is considered one of the fastest aging areas in the United States. The 75-plus age group has more than doubled in that area in the last years. many local residents, and this is the biggest projection of the need, most of the residents with elder parents have to send them within an hour to 2 hours away to other available facilities. Look at this slide here, shows the setting of the proposed building roughly in the center of the photograph, surrounded to the north by multifamily condos, to the east by multifamily condos, and commercial development to the south. This slide here shows that the actual footprint scale of the proposed building is actually smaller than the surrounding buildings. The following slide here shows that a majority of these buildings are 2-3-story buildings with pitched roofs. The building proposed with this project is 45 feet at its highest point, 25 feet step down toward the park to the west. And although it's 4 stories over 2 subterranean parking levels, the first level actually starts about 7 feet below the sidewalk level, so it physically appears shorter than what the 45 feet would imply. When you compare the actual elevations of the buildings across the street are actually about 1.5 feet higher because of the change in terrain. And as you continue northerly up the slope, obviously the terraced effect of the buildings makes them much, much higher than the proposed building. The comments about sensitive habitat were addressed. To make it clear about the brush clearance, and our expert can verify this, the rule is 100 feet of brush clearance from the face of the building. Nevertheless, we sent out our biological experts in late June to do an additional survey from what they did initially for the city's requirements. And they confirmed even 200 feet from the property line, there would be no sensitive habitat. There's vast evidence of human disturbance with the drainage facilities, non-indigenous plants, and so the claims about disturbance to habitat are simply not supported. Other hazards having to do with the fire department, again, Mr. Oakes is here to answer your questions if you need it. He submitted a letter that cites a combination of topography and the type of construction of the building and assures that this is a safe design. The issues about parking. There's been no evidence about parking being deficient in this area. In fact, we did do a comprehensive study within the LA Municipal Code guidelines that provides for about 64 parking spaces. We're providing 67. So the impacts to the trails are unfounded as well. So in conclusion, we would urge you to adopt staff's recommendation for no substantial issue. And Mr. Oakes and myself are available for questions if you have them.
Thank you. Turning back over to staff.
Okay, thank you. I'll just make a few quick points. Just to respond to Mr. Donovan's 3 main points, he was concerned that the project would impact public access, views, and habitat. And just to reiterate or respond to a few of his points, staff does acknowledge that there's trails in the area. We as staff and the commission required those trails in our original approval of the subdivision years ago. The analysis in the report focuses on where the project would have been visible from, primarily some of those trails that are up to 2 miles away, the major trails in the area. And our view analysis was when you're looking at it from those trails where the site would be visible, it's so far away and you're looking at the whole 800-unit subdivision, this is not going to present any sort of effect. The other trails that are in the city park or in the park are at a lower elevation and probably only be visible from that one point near the trailhead. But point out that any structure would be visible there, and we think they've done a good job here of, one, it's set back, the structure itself from the edge. There's a surface parking lot is located between the edge of the slope and the building. And then the building does have some step up in the upper stories. I think any building there would be somewhat visible, but we don't think that's going to be a significant impact, and it would only be visible from that very focused point of that trail. Now, in terms of the public access, the city did, as the applicant's representative mentioned, and contrary to Mr. Donovan's assertion, the city did analyze traffic in their analysis. They determined it would have 260 vehicle trips per day. We just don't believe that that's significant given the surrounding area, this 700-plus home subdivision, the amount of trips generated by this Eldercare facility we just don't believe are significant enough that it would somehow cause a traffic concern that could impact public access. Nor do we believe that the parking would generate any additional impact on local street parking. The We accept and concur with the city's analysis that the parking demand has been met and that it would not result in some sort of displacement of any on-street parking. And in terms of the habitat issues, their third point, as I mentioned in my original presentation, this would have no impact on any environmentally sensitive habitat, whether it's from fuel modification or from the development itself. So we do not believe it has any habitat impacts whatsoever. With that, that'll conclude my comments, and we'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you. Let's see. We are now at the point where we have commissioner comments, or if we have a motion. Does anyone have a motion for us? Or would you prefer to have questions or comments? Turning it back over to my commissioners. Commissioner Brownsey?
I'll make the motion in a second, but I do want to comment. I know that these projects are difficult, but I think this is an important project for the reasons stated by the applicant, because housing for seniors, especially in higher income zip codes, I think is very difficult to cite, even though it is an extremely needed service. Particularly, I think, as we all get older, and some of you are very young, but you realize that when families are trying to take care of their elderly parents or their elderly relatives, it really matters in terms of proximity. And particularly in those cases where you have family members who suffer from memory issues, who suffer from brain diseases such as dementia and Alzheimer's, or at least the early stages of those. So for me, this project, it was clear that there had been, in the plan of development that had been approved many years ago by the commission, it had been categorized as a commercial area. And also that when you looked at the surrounding neighborhood, that in fact it's densely developed with tall structures. And I think, fortunately for the people who live in that area, they have the proximity to all those wonderful state parks and state trails. But that's not a reason, in my mind, to deny elderly housing, which is something that is sorely needed in a lot of neighborhoods. So I'll make the motion at the appropriate time, Madam Chair, if there are other commissioners who have comments.
Any other commissioner comments? I think we may be ready for the motion.
Then, Madam Chair, I move that the commission determine that appeal number A-5 PPL-18-0035 raises no substantial issue with respect to the grounds on which the appeal has been filed under Section 30602 of the Coastal Act, and I am asking for a yes vote.
Second.
I don't know who beat who to the punch, but I'll credit it to Commissioner Padilla, and if there are other comments, then we'll allow those as well. For your motion, would you like to speak to your motion, Commissioner Brownsey?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I already did.
Commissioner Padilla?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I think the permitting jurisdiction made the correct findings and analysis. I think the staff analysis on the issue, on the SI issue, is more than thorough, and for those reasons, I support the motion.
Commissioner Howell?
I don't think I have anything further to add, Vice Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Lueveno?
Nothing further.
Any other commissioners desiring to speak on this matter? Okay, we have a motion and a second. The motion is to recommend a yes vote as to the issue of a finding of no substantial issue. Is there any unwillingness for a unanimous yes vote? Seeing none, we do find no substantial issue with respect to this appeal. And turning it back over to staff for the next agenda item.
Okay, thank you. So that brings us to item 16A. This is the coastal development permit application. We had taken a few things out of order, so we've already acted on item 15D. So if we could queue up the PowerPoint presentation for item 16A. So that's no problem. Once we start moving things around, it always gets a little confusing. So item 16A is the CDP application for the demolition of a 2,850 square foot duplex and the construction of a 3,666 square foot single-family residence with an attached two-car garage. Now, I would note, as a reminder, that this item was previously scheduled as a consent calendar item for action at the Commission's April hearing and was removed from consent calendar by Commissioners with some concerns regarding the loss of housing units in the coastal zone and the request that this item be brought back as a regular calendar item. Now, the applicant is 1830 The Strand, JA LLC. The project is located in the city of Hermosa Beach, approximately 0.2 miles north of the pier. Now, as shown on this next slide, the site is a beachfronting lot in an urbanized residential area. It's located immediately inland and adjacent to the Strand, which is the improved 26-foot wide public right-of-way or 26-foot wide walkway that separates the residential development from the public sandy beach. The project site is zoned for limited multiple family residential use and is currently developed with a two-story, 2,850 square foot duplex. The applicant is proposing to demolish that duplex, and the project also includes an approximately 4+ foot wide patio and back